So welcome to the AMATIC 2019 webinar series. My name is John Oakes, the AMATIC Midwest Region Vice President, and today's presentation is Implementing R in Your Intro Statistics course with Kate Kozak. And please note that the views expressed by the presenter are not necessarily the views of AMATIC, and any commercial products mentioned by the presenters are not endorsed by AMATIC. And McGraw-Hill Higher Education is proud to support the 2019 AMATIC webinar series. So now Kate is going to share her slides with all of you, and while she does that, I am going to read a short introduction, which apparently that was super fast, and I don't even have time to read the introduction. But Kate has been teaching at Coconino Community College since 1994. She is a past president of ARISMATIC, the past vice president of the Southwest region of AMATIC, and is currently the president-elect of AMATIC. And she is also on the leadership team of the Stat Prep grant. So why don't we all welcome Kate in the chat room if you haven't already, and I will turn it over to you now, Kate.
Thank you, John. So I am going to give my experiences with implementing R into my intro stats course. Like I said, I do teach at Coconino Community College. That is actually in Flagstaff, Arizona. We're not as cold as John, but we're not as warm as Phoenix. So that's a way to think about it. We're supposed to get to hopefully 4 to 6 inches of snow this weekend. So hopefully we'll get that and we'll be moving on. But about 4 years ago, I had this idea of implementing R into my Intro to Stats course. And this would kind of talk about the process I went through to have this happen. So the reason I was transitioning to R is that I wanted to move away from graphing calculators. Graphing calculators really, when you look at them, they very much take a very tiny data set because we don't want our students to have to input a lot of it. And I know that you can download data sets onto different people's calculators, but that never seemed to work very well for me. And so we just basically did the ones that the students could actually input into their calculators from the textbooks. And they didn't really get a good understanding of what data was. And so it actually created a little bit of problem of where the students don't really get to know what it is that data is really about and how to analyze it. So I had this idea of moving away from graphing calculators and transitioning to R. Now, my college is fairly small, so we only have 4 courses of statistics every semester. And I got this idea to teach all of the sections of stats in one fall semester. So 2 of them were online, 2 of them were in person, and I taught them all so that I could actually learn R and implement them into my classes while I was doing that. Not everybody's schools can do that because your school might have way more sections than you can teach, but it was just an interesting way to kind of be able to have control over it. And I decided to do it again because I didn't want to have my students, I wanted my students to play a little bit more with data. So that's why I did it. And why did I decide to adopt R is a little different. I did look at JUMP. I did look at other programs, other statistical software out there. I will let you know right now, I'm not a fan of Excel and do not use Excel in my classes at all. But I did look at other different options to use. Years ago, I used MyStat in my classes. So I've used statistical software throughout the years in my class, but I went to the graphing calculators because they were easier for the students. I adopted R for main reason was because it was free. And my school doesn't have a lot of money, and I didn't want my students to have to buy it. So it allowed my students to have access to it, allowed my college to have access to it without actually having to get it. So the transition away from it is I went ahead and downloaded R into my computer. So you can actually click on this link here. Well, you can't, but if you went to the link for R, and if you can't find it, it should be in your chat window now. But if you can't find it, you can actually just search R on Google and it will come up. And so if I went to that, it'll come up and allow you to put it in there. And this looks kind of not a great thing of doing something. But the other thing that was nice about R is that it works on Windows, it works on Unix, it works on Macs. So it didn't matter what software, what computers my students had, all of them could do it. And then they could just download it to R. You just click on the download to R, and then you can go from there. And it has a bunch of different versions of R. I just would go down to the one from the United States, and then I would pick, usually I pick the Berkeley one because it was first, and just because it was Berkeley, but there's no reason you could pick any of these other ones you wanted to download. And so I went ahead and did that. And then I went ahead a little bit here, but I went ahead and talked to my IT about getting on the computers in the classrooms. And we also have a student computer lab. I asked them to get it on the student computer labs. My IT department was really favorable for this. They had no issues getting it on there. There was no problem downloading R onto their materials. And so they were fine getting it on there and putting it there. The advantages of R is, of course, being free. It's also that I found out there are many different companies out there that are starting to use R. And in fact, if you go to glassceiling.com, it's a website that allows you to see what jobs are out there. They're actually requesting R in a lot of the jobs. So I realized it was useful for my students to also learn R, because then they'd have that skill. They could put that skill on their resume that they've had experience with R, whereas a graphing calculator doesn't actually get them any skill they could take outside the college and use. A graphing calculator has no use outside of a college besides doing things in your classes. So that was another advantage to it. One of the disadvantages of R, and you may have heard this, I'm sure, is that it's really difficult to learn. It has a steep learning curve. But I've actually, over the years, especially with my work on Stat Prep, have learned some of the great tricks of the trade that actually make it very easy. And I'm going to talk more about that later, of what my students' experiences is with it. The other thing is that one of the other disadvantages with it is that I found out that R can be downloaded on any computers, but now a lot of our students are getting Chromebooks, and you can't put R on Chromebooks. So that was a disadvantage to R, is that I had some students, online students and in-person students, that had R, had a Chromebook, and they couldn't get R into their computers. Students that are here, I'd say, well, you can go to the computer lab, but we have students where I am, I'm in the second largest county in the United States, and we have students that travel many, many miles to come to campus. And so they aren't necessarily on campus very often to do any work. So saying, oh, you can come to campus and use the campus computers isn't exactly useful. So I found that that was a very disadvantage to R, is that you can't get it on Chromebooks. So I will tell you how I solved that problem in a little bit. When I was learning R, I found that Googling things was my best friend. So I would go ahead and learn simple commands like to find a mean is just mean of them, whatever your variable is. To find a standard deviation is just SD of whatever your variable is that you're working with in that data set. I started off small. I learned very small commands, and then I started learning more involved commands as time went on. This website, this link, which should also be in your chat room, if you click on it, it takes you to a Google Doc that I've created that kind of tells you how to do certain things in R. And this is for just shows you kind of how to do the very simple, how to create a bar chart, how to create a pie chart, and some other useful programs. It's a pretty long file. I've made things different as life went on. Shows you how to do a histogram. Histogram's easy. It's just hist, and then of your variable that you want. But I have learned better ways to do things than this file, but this file's there if you would like to use it. And you have access to it, again, with this link that I believe John is putting in there. When I first started, I took all my data from my textbook that I was using and put it into a form that my students could actually read into it. So I actually gave my students on my website a link to all the data so they could just copy that link and put it into the file. If I go back to this file here, this is how I first started off doing it, is I just took, here's an example, here's the name of the data set, or the variable in this case. I saved it with this, and then you have this command, and this C command just means combine all these into one variable. And this was just a way I could give my students the data so they didn't have to type it in. Notice it still is a very small data set because I hadn't actually expanded beyond doing things the old with the way things are. So I was learning that way to do things. Then I learned how to do the descriptive statistics. Again, they're in that file. And the basic graphs. When you're using data in this form, creating a bar graph and a pie chart are not as nice and easy as it is with other things. One of my colleagues still uses her data this way and hasn't gone to the new way I'm doing things. And her students are fine using the old methods. You can also do inferences. You can do a t-test. And the nice thing about testing in R is that everything is like t.test or prop.test or chi-square.test or core.test for correlation. So most of them are kind of in that format. And it also does linear regression. And again, this file will show you how to do all of those things. I don't want to show every last one of them. And again, this was using just simple R. I then decided that I wanted to use R with data sets. I wanted to get more involved than just having R be just static like a graphing calculator. In fact, somebody said to me once, oh, it's just like having a graphing calculator. And so it wasn't any different what I was doing, but it was a nice transition from the graphing calculators to R. And then I decided, okay, I'm gonna start using data sets. So this link that John will be putting in the chat room, if you wanna go there also. And these are just Google Docs that I've created. This actually also shows you the same commands, but now using data sets. And what I've done is I've created a GitHub account where I put all of my data sets. I upload my data sets to that GitHub account. I give my students this link to all of those GitHub accounts and allow them to read the data in that way. So all of my students have this ability to get my data into there. I now can have much bigger data sets than what I used to have. So like this data set here, favorite color, instead of giving them a summary of how many people like blue and how many people like green and so forth, it actually is blue, green, red, orange for each person. And I don't remember how many numbers are in this set, but actually not that many, but this one has a bunch of numbers. So I would have these numbers all over the place, the students could see it. What's nice about the data set way is doing bar counts is a little bit easier, and pie charts are a little bit easier with data sets because they don't have to do certain things you'd had to do with the data the other way. So it was just a way to kind of get my students to kind of see more data. I then realized that I had the same problem where I mentioned before of the Google, the Chromebooks not being able to use it. Whoops, I didn't mean to click on that, apologize. So I decided to transition to RStudio. RStudio is a different type of program. It's actually built on R, and it actually isn't, you actually do need R to run RStudio. So you still need to download the R, then you can download RStudio. And RStudio is kind of like an interface that uses the R information. And so the advantages to RStudio is that it's a little bit easier to use because the interface is a little bit nicer for students to deal with and see. Getting RStudio onto your computer, again, you just click on this link that John will put on in the chat room. And it is free for desktops. And then you can just hit download and I'll put it on. Again, it works on any Mac, PC, or Unix system. It still had the same problem if it didn't work on Chromebooks. So I then had to look in what I was going to do with that. So that's where RStudio Cloud came in. RStudio Cloud is another way to do RStudio. It does not require anything to be put onto your computer because it's web-based. And all you need to do is click on the link of RStudio Cloud, and you can just Google RStudio Cloud also, and it will then ask you to sign up for it. And usually it's best if they have a Google account, like a Gmail, but if they don't, you can sign up with anything. So it allows your students to actually create their own RStudio Cloud somewhere else. I actually, at my school, decided to ask them to create an RStudio server. So last summer, around June or July, I talked to my IT people about creating an RStudio server here at the college. And what's nice about that is that my students log in to this RStudio server using the credentials they log into the college with. It is web-based also. And so therefore, anybody can use it. They can use it on a tablet. They can use it on their phone. Just as same with RStudio Cloud. You can use it on any computer system. The Chromebooks all work. So it's really nice because it's not based on anything other than being connected to the internet. So the advantages of the server is that I can actually ask my college. RStudio has packages that make life a little bit easier to run certain things with RStudio. And I'm actually able to tell my IT department, hey, I need this package put onto the server. And they're able to load these packages directly onto the server so my students have access to those packages. And so it's kind of a nice place to have an ability for my students. And then the other nice thing about it is that my students can all kind of access things and do it from anywhere. And they can also save whatever they did. So if they actually save their desktop, they can actually save it and then move on. And they can come back and that data stuff is all in there again. And so again, I can read my data sets in. I have them read them in using that same thing of a GitHub account. You don't need a GitHub account. You can do it other ways. You can read them in through directly uploading files into it. But this way, all of my students have the same data set. I can then work with them and we can do it in class and talk about it. So some of the basic commands is what I want to actually get into. And this is why RStudio is much nicer and the packages are much nicer. And it actually makes the learning curve not so big for RStudio. One of the learning curves that I've seen is that people have a hard time with the RStudio, with R and how to do things. But with RStudio, you actually can set your commands a little differently. And it makes life much easier for this. And so what you have to think about, and I just realized I don't have this up on here, but I do have some help files that I created. And these help files will show you how to do things just in RStudio. And then this is one of those help files, and it kind of just talks about the basics of RStudio. And this is what I want to talk about, is this is how most of the commands I do now with my students work, is you figure out a goal that you want your students to do. Like I want to create a bar graph, or I want to find a descriptive statistics, or I want to do a test. That goal goes first. Then you put a parenthesis, and then you do whatever your Y variable, your dependent variable is, tilde your X variable, your independent variable. And so anything can be done with this goal. Let's say I want to do a bar graph, I'd put in the command for a bar graph, then I'd do whatever my Y variable is. With bar graphs don't have Y variable, so I would just do tilde and then my X variable. And then you just say data equals data set. This ... just means there's more things you can do, but you don't have to. This is the basic command you can do. You can stop the parenthesis right here at the end, and it all works beautifully. And you have to explain to your students where this tilde button is, but that's about the only extent of what you have to kind of show them, is show them where this is. This file, again, is available to anybody. I've given the link in the, hopefully John put it in the chat room. And then you can also see how to create a new data set. If you want to just do data sets, you can create a new data set, bring it in. You can actually read in things from Google Sheets, which is kind of nice, because when you do that with a Google Sheet and you change the Google Sheet, it will automatically update it into RStudio. So it's kind of convenient. That's a good way to get your data into your students. You can share a Google Sheet with them and then give them this command to let them bring in the Google Sheet. So this is another nice way to get data in. It doesn't always have to be through a GitHub account or some other method like that. So another thing is I do actually have some learning RStudio other things. So graphing with RStudio. I'll go to that site. And this one is shows them kind of how to do it. Again, this is my data set I gave them. Again, the favorite color one again. You can now see a little bit about what the data set looks like. You can see that I have the color red, blue, blue, other, green, red. This information is here because it thought there were more columns, but this is just fake data here. So this stuff over here with the NAs is just fake. But I can now create a bar graph. Now, one of the things that I've found over the years with using R and RStudio now is that packages make life much easier to do certain things. And there's a definite package that is very, very useful, and that is called Mosaic. And so you'd want to make sure that Mosaic package is downloaded for your RStudio and be able to bring that up. And then once you have a Mosaic, you can do GF, which stands for graph function _bar. And then I would say I want to do color, so tilde color. And then my data set is this fave color. And then it creates a nice little bar graph. And you can see all the nice little information here. Again, that ... means you can do some other changes to it. So I can do like a title. So I can say I want to call this title is the favorite color. And I talk to my students about the fact that your titles should be descriptive of what your data is. And then you can do X labels. So you can label your X axis. I decided to label it with favorite color. I decided to do the Y label as count. Notice when you did R itself, it actually put labels on the X and Y axis. So you don't need to label them if you don't want to. But if you don't like their labels, you can make your own labels. And then if you don't like the fact that it was black, you can color it in and make it blue. So this, and you can make it any color you want. You can pick this, I don't know, it's like 200 different colors you can pick from. And so you can pick those colors and get that information. And so this file just talks about how we could do different things. Pietro charts are not the easiest things, but I don't know how useful they are. And just shows you different kinds of ideas on how to make pie chart. So this file is just something I've learned over the years how to create and do. And so I've been able to make this happen. Dot plots, and what allows me also, that's nice about R, is that on your graphing calculator, all you have really is, if you use an Excel, you can do a bar plot. If you use an Excel, you can do a pie chart. Dot plots are not easy to do in Excel. And in fact, like I said, I don't like Excel at all. I've never used it for my classes. I think it's actually a spreadsheet program that does statistics and not the other way around, where I want a statistics program that does statistics. So, yes.
So, Kate, there's a couple of questions. One of them is, did your college happily spend the money on the RStudio server for you?
Oh, I forgot to mention that. Thank you so much for asking that question. RStudio, for educational purposes, is even the server. RStudio for a server is free to the college because we're an educational institution. All I had to do was put on my syllabus that they must use RStudio in my class. I sent that to my IT department. They then sent that to R, and R said, oh, you can have it for free. So RStudio for a server is still actually free. And then my college gladly used server space for it. So that was not a question, but they were able to create that with no problem. So it still is free for your college to get RStudio on a server. But I had to put it in my syllabus that we did that. And that was the only stipulation. Did you say there was another question?
Well, the question was about the link for the correlation and regression, but I think it may have been some other issue because I just clicked on it again and it worked for me. So we can figure that out later on.
Okay. And I actually have to admit, I actually have gone everything to RStudio. So the files I'm now showing you are the ones I actually use.
So there was one more question, Kate. It's what does student output of an assignment look like? So I'm guessing that means maybe what you are expecting a student to turn in, maybe, or what would you expect the student output of an assignment to look like?
So what I actually asked my students, and I forgot to tell my students this yesterday that I want this, but I won't worry about the first assignment. But what I want my students to do is usually, here's an example. I'll go down to this one because this is a better example. Is I want them to copy what command they typed into R. And you can actually just copy it and paste it into a Word document. And then I want a copy of their graphs. So I want their graphs also from them. So I asked them to actually copy the commands they typed in, and I forgot to remind my students of that this week. And then I asked them to get me a copy of the picture. Now, RStudio has an export process, and the students can actually just export, copy, and then paste directly into Word or Google Docs or whatever you have them use. My R server for some reason won't allow students to do that as easily. And so I just have my students use Snippet or Grab It on a Mac to grab a picture of the graph and then paste it into Word. So that's what I require my students to type in, is give me the commands that they typed in and then give me the output from R. And so that's kind of what I do. So I'm hoping that answers your questions. I'm going to talk a little bit more about assessment at the end, and I can talk about how I do that.
So there's one more question about, somebody asked again, why are you using RStudio and not R?
So RStudio actually is just a better interface. Let me see if I can bring up my RStudio. Let me bring up R, and I'll show you what my R looks like. So this is the R interface. Do you see this?
No, because we can only see your browser window since that's the only window that you shared.
Okay, I apologize. I should have shared my whole screen. So can I undo that and start doing that again?
You should be able to.
Okay, so let's do that, and then I'll share again, and I'll share the desktop. There we go. Okay, so can you now see this?
Yes, we can see it now.
So this is R. This is what R looks like, and this is all the students get is this R console. And so it's not all that user-friendly for the students. I will also now go show you what my RStudio looks like. And this is the interface for RStudio. And so it has that R console here, like we had over here with R. So in R, we had this console. That's here in RStudio. We have all the data sets. We have the environment, which shows all the data sets that I've ever read into R and saved my R. It shows the plots right here, what they are. I can click on this and it shows what packages I can load into my R. Right now I don't have any loaded, but I can load one, and I can just click on it to say, hey, load it. Whereas before I would have to do a command in R command in the R console to create this. So it makes it a little bit easier. And also bringing in data sets is much easier in RStudio than it is in R. So under files, I can actually say I would like to upload by just clicking on upload, and I can bring in a data set from my computer. And I can actually show you that one right now. I can go find some data from my computer. Let's see where I've got some data for my computer. Let's see. I know I have some data on here. There we go. So if I were to, let's say, bring this data file in, I can say, I won't do that one. I can bring this one in. I can say I want to open it. I can say OK. And it actually brings that data file right into here. And then I can click on it and say, hey, I would like you to bring that file in. And you can see the file came in. It's in my, up here in my environment. So if I click on a data set, it will show me what that data set looks like. And then if I can now look at the one I just brought in, which was cancer, I think it was called. And so it just is a way, a little bit easier for students to play around with it and see how things work. So they find it much easier than R because the console is much nicer.
Can I ask a question, Kate? Well, there's two questions actually. So one is, what types of data sets can be read using RStudio?
I just brought in a TXT data set. Usually I do CSV data sets. So usually I save my data sets always as CSV. You can also do it with Excel. I haven't actually ever used an Excel one, but you can bring Excel files in also. You can also bring a Google Sheet in. So any one of those will work.
The other question that, and I sort of noted this when you brought up the R versus the RStudio, is that the RStudio was a newer version. So does the RStudio always automatically update to the newest version of R?
Yes, I believe it does.
So that would be an advantage of using RStudio then. Right.
But this is also my server at my college that I have up here right now. And so that one is a little differently for that is that the college might be already updating it all the time too. So I'm not positive if it will always update it automatically because I'm using the server that my college created. And by the way, my college, I talked to them in July, I think it was, to put it on, and they had it ready for my fall semester, which started in the end of August. So it wasn't hard for them to put it on there and get it in there. So that wasn't a concern for my college, is they didn't have any trouble getting that set up. So back to the presentation, I can do descriptive statistics with R. Oh, I want to go back really fast. I apologize. I don't mean to sound like I'm not really organized here. Going back to this one where we're talking about the different plots. That's the other thing that's nice about RStudio as opposed to your graphing calculator and Excel, especially Excel, is like I can create a dot plot. And that's quite easy to do. It's again, same command, gf_dot plot. And then it's got that same thing of tilde, your variable, and then your data set. And then I decide to throw a title on this one. And then I can do a histogram. And I can do a frequency polygon. So I know a lot of our books teach about frequency polygons, but we never could create them anywhere. Well, here you can do one quite easily in RStudio. A density plot, which I prefer over a histogram, and I tell my students that and we talk about it. But all of these can be done. I can also put two graphs in one. So I can do a density plot and a histogram all together so that they can see both on the same graph. And I can filter out. So let's say I wanted to look at a data set that's cancer that talks about the survival times for different types of cancer. I can actually do a dot plot of those different types of cancers. And it will actually separate based on the different types of cancer. So that's kind of a nice one also. You can do something called a jitter plot, which is basically a dot plot, but it moves the points off from each other so they aren't all on top of each other. And you can see a little bit more detail. This is one person's survival time, one person's survival time, one person's survival time. You can separate by some kind of qualitative variable. And actually, I just found out yesterday you can do a quantitative variable too. So it allows you to kind of do different pieces with this. And you're able to take data sets that are more involved and create different types of graphs and different things that you couldn't do with your graphing calculator, even Excel. There's a thing called a violin plot, which you can also do on R quite easily. So these are just the different types of, what's nice about RStudio is that all of these different exist inside of them. I can also do, what's wrong? I can also go back to here, and I want to look at doing descriptive statistics. And again, it's the same process. I do goal, I do my Y variable total my X if I have a Y and an X, and then I do my data set equals. And so all the commands are the same way. Oh, this didn't seem to go to the right link. Sorry about that. Huh, I seem to have the wrong link there. I apologize. That should go to descriptive statistics of how do you create that. I'll get that link updated so that John can send that out to everybody. I apologize that I got the wrong link there. I can do probabilities with RStudio. And so I can do different probabilities. Again, these are all going to the wrong place. I apologize. I don't know how I did that. I don't know how that happened. So I apologize. I'll fix these and make sure they get posted in somewhere so you can see those. This one shows you how to do inference with R. And like I said, all of them are like prop.test, t.test. You can do confidence intervals. Actually, what's nice here is that the confidence interval and the hypothesis test are put together. So you get, here's your p-value. Here's your statement of what the alternative hypothesis was. Here is your confidence interval. So it gives it all to the students at once. Here's even your p-hat. So it's kind of nice the way that does it, and it does it with all of these. So that's what I also like about R, is that one of the things I didn't like about some of the other software that's out there for computer softwares is that it gives them way too much information and the students had to figure out what it is. Here it gives them exactly what they need. They know they want to do a t-test, then it will give them the t-value that you had. It'll give them the degrees of freedom. It'll give them the p-value. And then it even tells them, hey, this was the alternative hypothesis you were supposed to be doing. Here's your confidence interval, and here's even your mean, your X bar. So I like that about R, is it doesn't give them too much, it gives them exactly what they need. This shows you how to do a two-sample pair test. You change your data set a little bit, but that's about the extent of it. It shows them how to do a two-sample independent test. And so all of these will kind of show that. It does regression and correlation. So hopefully this is the right one. And you can see this regression equation going on here. And again, I ask my students to type in to give me this information, and then they can actually copy this output and give me that output. So they can give me this as what they typed into R, then they can give me this, what they give out. My college uses Canvas, so I have my students, if they want to, they can just upload all of their assignments to Canvas, and they don't have to figure out how to get that information out any other way. And it's really nice here because R actually makes it really easy. It's just a nice little command of GF for graph function again, LM for linear model, and it'll plot the linear model right onto the dot plot with it.
So, Kate, there's a question of, is there a way to drill down and see some of the formulas used?
By R, so I don't actually make my students do any formulas, any calculations with formulas by hand anymore. So I don't actually have them see anything of how you create these things. When you use the large data sets that we're using these days, you aren't going to be able to do that. And some of my data sets that I'm giving them now have hundreds of data points, so you wouldn't want to do that. But they can see right here exactly what commands they're typing into R. So that they're able to do. And but I don't make my students calculate anything by hand anymore.
I think the clarification on that question was such as what formula is used for degrees of freedom.
Oh, Going back over to that, it doesn't actually tell us, I can't actually see exactly what calculation is doing for degrees of freedom, but it does say that this one is the Welch two-sample t-test, so it is using the Welch calculation for the degrees of freedom. So that's the non-equal variance model. And you can actually say you want to force it to do equal variance. There's a command you can actually put up here in your t-test to force it to do equal variance. We're finding out, though, that equal variance isn't the best assumption in the first place, so I don't make my students even look at that anymore. But you can make it do that, so you can say I want it to be degrees of freedom with that, and it will actually give that the other degrees of freedom here. But it is using the Welch degrees of freedom, so that's kind of how I can know what it is. Does that answer the question? All right.
Yeah, I got an okay, so that's good.
All right, thank you. The other thing that is that I can also have my students do is I can actually have them plot the residuals. It will calculate the residuals for them. It will plot the residuals, and we can talk about what residuals are telling us about. Graphing calculators can't do that. Excel doesn't do that. So it's a nice way to get your students to see, hey, this residual here is negative, which means that the data value is above what the line said. So it's kind of nice to see this information. You can actually dig more deeply into the whole idea of residuals. Calculating the correlation coefficient is, again, also very easy to do. So all of this stuff is in here to how to do this. All right, so I do want to talk a little bit. I want to give myself a little bit of time to talk about using it in my classroom. I actually happen to have computer classrooms here on campus that I use. So I actually have because we're now using RStudio server, my students have access to R in front of them in their computer classrooms. We have 30 computers and 30 students in the class. So that's what my ability is this semester. I don't always get that every semester. I had a friend of mine who taught without a computer in her classroom, and she would just show them on her teacher computer what was going on, but the students had to go home and do it on their own. So that is a possibility. If you have a non-computer classroom, you can do that. With a server or with RStudio Cloud, if you can't get your college to use the server, they can do it on any one of the tablets they have or their phone. I have found out one issue with a tablet and phone, and that is that sometimes you need to put quotes, and Word does the same thing. So I found the same problem with Word. Word likes to put fancy quotes. The iPad, I'm finding, also likes fancy quotes, and I'm assuming my phone does the same thing, my iPhone. And so R can't deal with those fancy quotes. It doesn't know what to do with that. So that's the only thing I found to where your tablet doesn't work as well. But you can have students bring tablets in. Even though I'm in a computer classroom, a bunch of my students bring their own laptops in. Not that all my students have laptops, because they don't all have them, but those who have it bring in their laptops or their tablets on their own, even though we're in a computer classroom. For assessment, what I do is a little different than what other people may do. I give the homework. We have them do it all on the computers. I tell them I don't want to see any hand-drawn graphs, that they all should be done on a computer of some kind. Again, I prefer not to use Excel, so I tell them it can't be Excel, but you can do what you want. And then they give me that information, and I have them tell me what command they type in, and then their output that they get. The other thing that I do with the assessment is on tests. So two of my tests are actually take-home tests, and I know some schools don't allow you to have take-home tests, but my school hasn't had a rule about that. So I give take-home tests to where I can give my students a data set, and I ask them to create all of these graphs, and I ask them to interpret the graphs, which is the more important thing to me, is the interpretation of the information and not just on creating the graphs. And I think that's one of the things that we've always spent our time in statistics in the past, is we spend our time teaching them how to create these things, but not as much time analyzing the data. And I like to talk about the story that the data tells them. And so I spend more time with that, and that's what I really want. If you can't do a take-home test, like my final exam is an in-class test. So what I do for that is I just give them what the output is from R, and then they have to find the right answers from that output. And so they're basically still using the data set, they're still getting the information from it, they're still knowing how to read the information from R, and then they're able to come up with their information, their values. I know that in my computer classroom, I have a way to lock down their computers. I don't know what software we use, and I don't use it very often. So if I did give an in-class test, I could do that where I lock it down. Even the second test, which is usually of a probability, where I have them calculate normal distribution information and binomials, which I'm going to try to reduce binomials a bit. The binomial, that stuff I still have them as a take-home test. R does all those calculations. Because the file was the wrong file, I couldn't show that to you. I will, like I said, get that fixed. And you can see what I created with that. So that's what I do. My third test is actually a project where they go and collect their own data, come up with their own hypothesis, and then read that into R. So that is also a take-home. It's like a 3-week project that they work on. I then give an in-class test that's over concepts to make sure they got the concepts down. So that's what I do with assessment in my class. I want to talk a little bit about my student responses to this. So we are 3 weeks into the semester right now at my school. The first week is mostly definition week. I was actually not here. I was at the JMM conference, so I missed the first week of the semester. So my students didn't get access to R until the second week of the semester, and only the third week. And they're already, I've always heard complaints of, oh, students can't get it, or it's really hard for the students, or there's a hard learning curve. The one student who's having a hard time in the class is having a hard time with computers in general, which you'd probably be having a hard time with calculators in general. So I think she would be the same kind of student either way. The other ones are fixing my stuff. So they're telling me when I made a mistake in my R, they're telling me, hey, you should have done this instead. Yesterday we did a group work in class where I had them looking at descriptive statistics, and they would ask me questions like, well, can R do this? And I said, I don't know, let's find out. And they would go do it. And another group, they were coming up with the descriptive statistics, and they decided, well, let's go look at the graphs. So they went and created graphs for their stuff. And so the students have no problem actually with RStudio. They had a little trouble with R. I will admit that R was a little bit more work than RStudio was. But they've been able to work it through. They answer questions, and like I said, they've only had basically a week and a half of access to it, and they're already helping me and telling me what to do. If you can't do any of this, but you have ability for browsers, I do want to mention that John mentioned I'm involved in the Stat Prep grant. We have some material for Stat Prep, and I want to kind of just take a couple minutes to show it to you.
So there is a question, Kate, about how long did you use R before switching to RStudio?
I used R all the way through last year. So this fall was the first time I started using RStudio. And my students actually, even with using R, they would correct my things and tell me what I was doing wrong. So even though we switched over to RStudio recently, they would tell me how to do things. And in fact, one of my students in the past found one of the packages I now use for probabilities. He went and looked for it. He said, oh, I think we should be able to do this. And he found it for me and told me what that package was. So even when we were using R and not RStudio, my students were able to get most of it. And then I tell my students that they can copy exactly what they do in R and whatever error it gives them and paste it into an email and email it to me, and I can find the mistake. The biggest frustration I get from my students is that R is very case sensitive. And so I say to them, it'd be like typing in a password. Your passwords are case sensitive. You can't suddenly type in a different password and expect to get logged into something. Same thing with R. You have to pay attention to the casing of your words. So if you want to also, you can use Stat Prep. We have some resources. So this is the Stat Prep website. If you want to find out more about it, we have some information about Stat Prep. It is a grant that is training two-year college teachers mostly on using data-centric methods in statistics. And so we have some workshops this summer. We have one in Hartford, Connecticut, one in Seattle, one in Fort Worth, Texas, and one in Washington, D.C. area. And you can apply for one of these workshops. The workshops are free to attend, but we don't have, and we have a small stipend for travel. But other than that, we don't have a way to get you. That's why we have them all over the country, is so that hopefully we can get you one that's close to you. But even if you don't go to one of the workshops, we do have some different resources. These are the little apps. They're actually built in R, but you don't actually have to know any R to do them, and you actually have to, your students don't need to learn any R. So it does some things where they get to learn more about the data and find out what the data is telling them about. And I'm not going to go into all of these because this is, there's some webinars on these. So there's a webinar series that shows you how to use some of these things. There's class lessons, which I take into my classes on occasion and talk about using data and how to work with it.
So it seems like there's another question here, Kate. How many instructors at your college are using this teaching method using R?
All of my instructors have to use R. So every stats class must use R. Again, we only have 4 sections a semester, but I'm teaching one of them while one of my other colleagues is teaching 2, and she is using R. And then we have a part-time faculty member who's a little resistant towards it, but we tell them it is a requirement of the college to use R. There's also some tutorials in the RStudios. There's some data sets that you can get to, and then some other information. So this is just something for you, but we're almost out of time. So I do want to go back and just thank you first off for your great questions you've asked, but I want to know if there's any more questions.
Yeah, so let's thank Kate in the chat room if you haven't already, but if there are any other questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or in the chat. And while you all are going ahead and getting your final questions in, I'm going to go back to the final slides, if you don't mind.
No, go right ahead.
Okay, so let's see.
Oh, I do want to point out that you can also email me. So that's my email. So if you would like to email me, if you have other questions that you can't think of right now, but you'd like to know more, or you'd like access to those, all those pages I showed you, I created in a thing called R Markdown, which I have been thinking about having my students use, but I haven't actually gone that far yet to having my students use R Markdown to turn in their information. I've thought about it, but I'm a little afraid that some of them might not get it. So, and it's actually not hard to use. But I have a student who's like, I don't want to type anything. She wants to handwrite everything. So we have different abilities of students in our classes. And so I haven't decided to use RStudio yet. I mean, R Markdown, which is part of RStudio. But if you want to email me any questions you have, I can also send you all the files that I've created. I've created a lot of different group works I take in my class that show them how to do everything in R. I'm more than welcome to share any of that information with you. So are there more questions, John?
Well, it looks like there's actually more thank yous and well dones than anything else here. So John says, good to see you again after you, after your impact address at NCMATIC last March.
Thank you, John. It's good to see you too. Well, not see you because I don't see anybody, but this is very weird. I don't like this. I don't like teaching this way.
So there's one more question right before the buzzer. How much R did you figure out before day 1 of the first class of using it yourself?
I probably figured out how to create graphs and how to find descriptive statistics before the first day. Though actually, I probably didn't do that. I probably just figured out how to get the data into it and how to create some basic graphs. And then over the semester, I learned the other things I was going. Now I know most of it, but at that time, and I have that file I gave you, I have it up on my Canvas site so I can actually show my students, hey, I don't remember how to do this stuff either. I have to bring something up to show me how to remind myself how to do it. So I kind of did that, where I probably learned basically how to get the stuff in and how to create some graphs, and then I went from there. I was learning on the job.
All right, well, thank you again, Kate, and thank you all for participating in today's AMATIC webinar. And if you'd like to support future AMATIC webinars, please consider becoming a member of AMATIC if you're not already at bit.ly/join-amatic. And just like things are case sensitive in R, the link there is case sensitive as well. So please remember to like AMATIC on Facebook at facebook.com/AMATIC. And recordings of past AMATIC webinars can be found at bit.ly/AMATIC-webinars. And I'm the one who uploads the recording, so I will try to do this as soon as I can for all of you, along with making sure that the links are correct in the PowerPoint before you receive it. And let's see. Please remember to take 2 minutes to evaluate the webinar content in the presenter today at bit.ly/amatic80. And if you need email confirmation of your participation in this webinar, please fill in the optional section at the end of the evaluation, and I will make sure that you get your certificate. So I will make sure that I put this link in the chat room also, but when you leave the webinar, the link may come up when you leave the webinar if you forget to take the survey. Actually, it may or may not, but I do know that it's bit.ly/amatic80, and that you can use the QR code, or if you forget the link and need to take the survey later, just send me an email and I will make sure that you get the link. So that concludes the webinar for today. So I am going to stop the recording now.